Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Glick. And if this is your first time joining us, our show has a couple different flavors to it. Sometimes when you tune in, you're going to hear interviews with individuals associated with the industry where we'll talk about their origin story, how they got started into the industry, and then also dig into some of the projects that they've worked on in the past. Other times that you tune in, you're going to hear some industry news where we'll put up some headlines on the screen and we'll talk through what's going on, what's the latest, and we'll go beyond the headline and dig into some of the content of those articles that you may be seeing out there. And today we have an interview style show, and I'm excited to be joined by Jamie Wilson, who is a professional land development engineer at AIM Engineering and Surveying. Jamie, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yeah, and so as we always do on this show and this type of podcast that we do is we like to find out, really how you got started into the industry. And so, for you on the engineering path, can you walk us through, what was your decision to actually get into engineering, or kind of what did that look like leading up to it?
Well, originally I was actually going to school for to become an attorney, a criminal defense attorney or a family law attorney. So I started my bachelor's degree in a legal studies major. I decided to go to DC to do an academic internship and realized there that that wasn't my passion. And so I talked to the attorney. I discussed kind of that this was not what I really want to do in and out every single day. And he said, well, I would never tell you not to work or not to go to law school because that teaches you critical thinking and you can utilize that in every aspect of a professional career. But he said, maybe you shouldn't be an attorney. What are some things in school that you really like to pursue? And I said, well, I've always been pretty good at math and science. And he said, well, why didn't you do engineering? And I was like, well, I don't know. I never heard of it. So that was during the summer. That next fall, I decided to change my major to environmental engineering and pursue an engineering degree.
All right, nice. So how far did you get into on the legal side? How far did you get into that path? I mean, were you at the pretty early stages of it, or did you actually get into taking some classes on the legal side?
I was in the 3,000, 4,000 level classes for a bachelor's degree. So I was probably like going into my junior year ish
Okay.
time. So whenever I did switch to engineering, almost almost every class didn't transfer. So I pretty much had to restart my entire bachelor's degree over again, which
Oh,
was
nice. Nice.
unfortunate, but it was worth it by the end of it.
Yeah. So do you ever lean on any, I never took many of those classes when I was in college, but do you ever lean on any of the things that you learned going down that path to start with in your engineering path, or was it more of just, you went through it, but it doesn't really come into play in what you're doing these days?
No, I mean, I read legal writing all day long. There's a lot of policies, a lot of laws and rules that, most of the land development is kind of kind of dependent on, and also just the laws of engineers. So, I mean, I don't regret my decision of going down that path originally, besides wasted time and money in college. But other than that, um, it was a good background to have. And whenever I told professionals that when I was looking for a job or an internship that that's what I was pursuing originally, they actually their eyes kind of like had a little bit of a spark that opened up. They're like, "Oh,
Mm.
so you know how to read law?" And I was like, "Yeah, a little bit." I took a few classes in it.
Nice. So it does sound like it has come into play. And so as you got into the engineering industry, and obviously early on getting in there and everything, did you have were there any mentors that kind of helped you along the way to get to where you're at, or how did you lean on other people to help guide you in those early days, and even to today, like as you're continuing to probably come across things that may be new to you and things of that nature? How do you lean on mentors?
So yeah, mentors, kind of an interesting concept that has really evolved for me since college. So in college, they tell you that you really need to get a mentor. It's paramount for your success. And as if there's so many good mentors out there in the profession. And I don't know if it's just engineering, um, but it didn't seem as prevalent as they made it seem in college. And it was really hard to find some really good mentors. And at the end of the day, leadership can really make it or break it for a lot of the young engineers here. I know a lot of people that decided to get out of engineering, or they just changed companies multiple times because they didn't have the right fit mentor. And kind of how I've dealt with it is that you, especially in the private development, is down here in Southwest Florida, it's very busy. And sometimes it's really hard for experienced professionals that have a lot on their plate, have a large workload, to have a priority of your own success over their workload. So you do need to kind of lean on the willingness to learn, the ambition of your own to push you through. But if you can find a really good mentor, then that's significant and that's rare, and you should really lean on that. I've had a couple in my life that have, for instance, the attorney that has kind of turned me into becoming an engineer. I'll be forever grateful for him and his advice to me. But I have right now, I have an engineering manager that's fantastic, and that is really more involved in growing every engineer that's in his department and like really focusing in on that. But at my early stages, it was really hard to find, especially other female engineers as a mentor as well. That's really rare in the private land development
Yeah.
arena.
Yeah, I was looking as you were talking. I was and kind of brought up the people leaving the industry and everything. It kind of reminded me of all the way back episode number 7. I had to look at the number here, but I had a gentleman named Terry Lutz on the show who he was actually talking about that and the fact that there is such a shortage of engineers and especially civil engineers, and that it's one of those things where they struggling to find people because there aren't as many people in the industry. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because that triggered that in my mind, that I remember that coming up before and being something there. And so the leadership, it sounds like, can play a big role in retaining talent and helping people in that engineering role be able to grow into the role and everything like that, to keep them around versus um, versus just having people exist in the business and not necessarily have growth opportunities and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost every aspect of engineering right now is having issues with labor, finding labor. CAD techs, permitting assistants, really experienced engineers, about like 10 years post licensure. That's really hard to find as well. It's going to be interesting in the future on how that's going to affect.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit here. So one thing that I think about quite a bit is the relationship and the dynamic between the land development companies and the engineering firms. And so from your perspective, how do you think that land developers, and this is obviously coming from the perspective of the engineering firm, right? How do you feel that land developers can best collaborate with engineering firms?
Well, I think just communication in general is always great, no matter how it's which kind of medium that you use for that communication. From my experience, Bluebeam has been significant in the engineering and land developer or any kind of collaborative team. It's really easy to use. That's been the main one that I've seen. Teams meetings are becoming more prevalent ever since COVID. Um, Having something that's more virtual and just easily get on a Teams meeting, and a lot of people have it on their phone now. So it's mainly communication back and forth, and also like clearly putting out the expectations of what the developer needs from the engineering firm. If the engineer is not telling the client exactly what they're willing to do, that can hurt the collaboration and also like budget and schedule and everything else.
Yeah, so kind of a two-way street, it sounds like, between the two groups, but just making sure that communication versus making assumptions, I suppose, when developers are coming to engineering firms. And obviously, I mean, a lot of developers already have their preferred engineering firm that they're going to be working with and everything, but as they may be looking for others and stuff, trying to make the right decision on how they interact and try to come to the best result with them and everything. And I
Mhm.
guess with that said, do you see any common like gotchas that, mistakes that developers make out of the gate when they're working on a project? Anything they overlook, or assumptions that they may make that they should probably take a step back and make sure maybe there's certain due diligence or something that they should do that they're not when they just kind of jump into projects?
Yeah, due diligence is really important, but also um, just permitting. Permitting is probably one of the biggest that I see. I've sent proposals to potential clients, and they sent me competitors' proposals. And looking at it, I'm like, well, they don't have half the permitting or some of the necessary tasks that it needs to be done. Which then, so yes, they might be the lowest proposal, but then after change orders and addenda, that's going to be probably even more expensive than maybe my proposal where I just gave it to you out of the gate. So that's probably the biggest. I've actually helped a lot of potential clients, even though they decided either to hire us or not to hire us. I've helped them a lot and just try and show them like, well, they're missing this permit and this permit. Maybe just because that engineer is not used to this area, this municipality, um, or wherever it may be.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought, and it's one of those things too. I've had a maybe just one conversation with somebody from representing a city, and was kind of hearing their perspective on things of, what are some of the things that developers, overlook and everything. And it does feel like there are quite a few projects that tend to like start moving forward before they have some of those pieces in place, and then it gets expensive because, yeah, you start drafting things, potentially for them. And I'm sure good engineering firms like you guys will actually, you know catch those things versus going and drafting a bunch of stuff before you validated that they have the proper pieces in place with the municipality and things of that nature. So is there like is there almost like a checklist that you would follow to make sure that certain things are done before you start getting into the big spend of putting renderings and stuff together?
Yeah, one of the first things I do is just look up if it has any previous permits on it, because that could save you a lot of time and energy. And then also just obviously check where the property is, the subject parcel, and see what type of road is next to it. Because if it's FDOT, then of course, if it's a state road, like they have their own driveway and drainage connection permits, and then obviously utilities. And there's some areas around me that they don't have centralized utilities as readily available, and that can really make or break a project. And also just having kind of a gut feeling on earthwork analysis, because Southwest Florida, we're very low, we're very flat, but there's a lot of floodplains. And the finished floor elevations need to be at a certain, need to be at least a foot above those base flood elevations. And as much as people say dirt is cheap, it is not. It's not. It's not cheap to move. So try to get those gut feelings out, and I think just experience kind of gives you that, and being really knowledgeable about the area and the municipalities and agencies that are in that area.
Nice. Are there any, in the I guess since you've been working on, whether it's in your current role or where you worked at previously, are there any land development projects that you've worked on that kind of stand out to you? Ones that maybe one that, whether it was, I always say like whether it was the most challenging or maybe one that was just really cool to work on. Do you have any that you could talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So um, previously, I worked on a project that was about 560 acres, and it was a mixed use, so it has residential mainly in the back and commercial up front, which is kind of like a standard, typical mixed use development down here. The challenge was that it was just very flat, very monosloped, and a lot of wetlands. And it was kind of a beast to do the hydrology model and make sure that there wouldn't be flooding issues. Another challenging aspect of it was that there was like a cutout and kind of in the middle of the development of residential that was privately owned that wasn't part of the development. And they kind of did their own stormwater management uh, apparatuses. It was very interesting to see, and it was kind of they put themselves in a bowl, and to kind of so it was like, well, that might not be in our scope or anything, but of course, as an engineer, you need to always be aware of public safety and health and welfare. So I had to take that into an account as well, of making sure we didn't have a negative impact on flooding, since it
Gotcha.
was in an area that had significant flooding in.
Gotcha. So, in that situation, whereas I suppose if you controlled all the ground for the project that you're working on, it'd be a different story when you've got something that's like, a group that's right in the middle of it that's doing something their way. But you've got to, I suppose, I guess from a stormwater standpoint, you need to make sure that the stormwater isn't necessarily all funneling into them and how they're managing it. You have to manage the stormwater for some of your space on your own. Is that kind of what you had to do?
Yeah, we had to take into account what they were doing on their own properties, but also adjacent to those properties were wetlands that also need to be hydrated. You don't want to dry out a wetland, and so you kind of had to balance the two on making sure that you take into account what private owners next door are doing, and also what's good for the environment, but then what's also good for the development as well, and make sure that that all coexists together. So it was very challenging, to model and also to design. So
Yeah, and I wonder on the stormwater side of things. I was thinking when we spoke previously that there was something maybe in the state of Florida, because in the state of Iowa they just passed legislation here related to stormwater to try to have more, I think more regional stormwater facilities rather than having every single development have to like set up their own stormwater and try to manage that, and adds to the cost of the projects and everything as well. Is there anything like that going on in Florida, or anything that has changed with stormwater management or how that's being handled, or is it kind of the same status quo as it has been?
no, there's actually right now they're waiting for a legislator to approve of a stormwater rule update, and that's going to have significant impacts on land development here in Florida. So originally it was just a pre versus post for water quality, making sure that you don't have as much of a nutrient loading rate post as you did in the pre-development phase. And now they are changing that where it's going to be around 80% to 90% in impaired water bodies, which is going to be very difficult to accomplish with the traditional stormwater treatment plans. Like a typical wet detention, which is like a typical stormwater facility down here in Southwest Florida, is about 43% effective
Okay.
when removing like nitrogen, for instance. So now trying to get 90% out of that, obviously you're going to have to increase the stormwater management facilities. That's going to cost more. And if there's less homes on the piece of property, that's going to have a negative impact towards the land developer. So that should be going into effect. Well, they're anticipating to go into effect in about a year. So that's going to be
Okay.
big changes.
So something for people to keep an eye on, and keep that in mind as they're looking at new projects and everything as well, because it could potentially be coming in the next year.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay, well let's go into the, I guess the last section here is the lightning round, where I've got five different questions that I'm gonna run by you, or I guess things to get your thoughts on in general. First one here is, what are the main benefits of being actively involved in professional organizations as a land development engineer?
The first one is just networking, just creating relationships with like multiple disciplines and civil engineering is always a plus. I mean, as a land development engineer, you're going to be utilizing geotech engineers, landscape architects, um, like almost every type of civil engineering is going to be used in the land development. So to make those networks and have friends that you could call and ask any question to is paramount.
Nice. All right, second one. What advice? So this was something you mentioned earlier. Not very many women in the field that you're in. What advice would you give to other women who are looking to get into the engineering field?
I would say really focus on your confidence. So I read somewhere, I believe it was like the Harvard Business Review, that women won't apply for a job unless they are 100% qualified versus men will apply for that same job if they're 60% qualified. And that I've seen across the board in almost every decision, at least in the engineering. is that women just don't feel as confident unless they 100% know through and through the information. And versus like men, they know they can figure it out. They have that confidence typically, and this is, large generalizations, but I would say really focus in, because everything is confidence. If you don't believe in yourself, then somebody else is not going to believe in you.
Yeah. Well, I have seen. I can speak for all men. No, I'm just kidding. But I have
Speaking
seen.
for all women.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have seen plenty of resumes from guys come in that are probably more like 10% qualified, but they're still going for it. So no, that's really good advice, and that's interesting, and that's something that yeah, I'm glad you shared that. The confidence factor is huge, um,
Mhm.
huge. So appreciate that. All right, third one here. Going back to when you first started in the industry, what has been the biggest change that you've noticed in engineering?
Oh, I would say a lot of like permitting. Permitting has changed a lot since, and I don't know if it's just COVID. There's been a lot of turnover in this area, at least in municipalities and agencies. Um, and the permitting is just becoming more and more stringent, and it's becoming an issue in the land development industry for sure. Stuff's just taking longer. It's not getting approved. There's more reviews, which costs more money. So that's probably the largest difference lately.
Okay. Fourth one here. What is one personal habit that contributes to your success?
Oh, I would say, oh, I think I heard this one on one of your other podcasts. I would say working out. Yes,
Yeah.
being active, and I do that every morning. Wake up at 4:30 in the morning and I go to the gym for an hour. And that's I feel like whenever you achieve something so early in the day, then you already kind of have your mindset that you are making changes, you're doing stuff that is moving the needle forward, and then also you're taking care of your body and your mental health, more importantly.
Yeah. I think it gets, and I think a lot of people too, when it comes to like fitness and health and everything, I think people make the assumption that if you work out in the morning that it's going to make you tired, but I've always seen that it's kind of the opposite, where it actually gives you
Mhm.
energy.
Yep.
So yeah, I definitely won't be doing it at 4:30 in the morning, but but no, that's awesome. I think that's a really good one there. All right, last one here. So what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the land development industry in Southwest Florida?
Oh, well, we already kind of touched on that stormwater rule update. It's gonna have some large impacts. Um, I think labor, though, it's probably going to have the most impact. So, I mean, you kind of already see it now where, I mean, I think when I first started, I would get a recruiter that called me maybe once, twice a year, to now I get recruiters calling me constantly. They call the company I work for and ask if I'm there. And it's almost like it's the Wild West out here when it's trying to hire people. So, that's going to be really interesting, in just surveyors, uh, CAD techs, permitting assistants, everything. I think that's going to have a large impact on the industry.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting seeing the how headhunters work and stuff and how they go after. Like you see companies stop putting all of their people's contact information on the website because that's essentially like the blueprint for someone to come in and try to steal someone away from a company. It's just it's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. And I suppose when you're in an industry where companies really need civil engineers and they can't, there's just not enough of them out there. The only place to go get them is going to be from other companies. And so that even makes it even more important for leaders in these engineering firms to keep their people happy and give them room for growth and everything like that. So yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, well, with that said, I guess that's a good spot to wrap up. What is the best way for people listening in to, connect with you personally or to learn more about, the company where you're working right now? What's, I guess, what would be the best way for people to reach out?
To reach out to me, they can find me on LinkedIn, Jamie Wilson, P at CFM. I'm sure there's a bunch of numbers behind that actual URL, but sure, you can find me on there. And then aimengineering.com. I think it's AIMENGR.com. And you can figure out a little more about our company. We've been 44 years going now, family owned, operated, do public work, private development. We have obviously surveying, CEI, do a lot of FDOT work. So yeah, they're
Cool.
redoing the website pretty soon, so I can't wait to see that too.
Awesome. Well, those of you listening in, the links, all of these links and everything will be on the show notes page. And if you haven't ever looked in the description of these podcast episodes, the link to the show notes page is always there. So you can always click on there and get the contact information for our guests on the show, and then also a quick summary of what was discussed on the show. So, with that said, thanks again for joining. Really appreciated the conversation, and that is all for this episode. So we will talk to you next time. Thank you.